Hi, welcome to the next filter challenge tutorial. This time we're going to be focusing on the Gaussian blur. Now the Gaussian blur, I think, is the most used filter out of all of the filters, and I know you're going to find it in many of the other tutorials here at Hummy's World. But I found a special technique that I want to share with you, and you may even learn a little bit about your camera here along the way. Here is a photo that I have applied this technique to, and the technique is called an Orton effect. And I have some text here to help guide me on what I wanted to tell you about as an introduction to this technique that utilizes the Gaussian blur. The Orton effect is also called an Orton slide sandwich, and it was originated by a photographer named Michael Orton. And what he did was to use two separate photos on slides, and he put those two slides together. That's why it's called the slide sandwich. And he put the two slides together before processing. And the two slides would blend two different photos of the exact same scene, resulting in a distinct mix of high and low detailed areas within the same photo. In other words, it gets very saturated. You can see details in through it's hard to explain. You almost have to watch it happen as you play through the tutorial, but it will be a highly saturated photo. It also is one of the two images that you're blending gets blurred, and this creates a soft focus effect. Hence why we are going to be utilizing the Gaussian blur. It's the main tool utilized in this technique. Now you may recognize it if you're familiar with some of the camera techniques out there. You may recognize it as being similar to HDR, which HDR is I think high definition range photography, and HDR also blends one or more photos in order to create a photo that has a lot of high and low detail areas. By high and low, I mean the highlights and the shadows, the darker and the lighter. You've seen them on the internet and may not even know what they are, but they're really powerful photos. And this is similar to an HDR techniques when you get into Photoshop, except for the difference is that in HDR you're using two or more I gotta say this backwards. In the Orton effect, you're using two or more overexposed images only, and with one of them blurred. But in the HDR, you're using two or more photos with different exposures. Normally, one of them will be underexposed, one of them will be normally exposed, and one of them will be overexposed. And all of the images are sharp and clear. So most of the time when you see HDR techniques applied, they have under, normal, and over, and all the images are sharp and clear. That doesn't mean that they can't be different. But with the Orton effect, all images are overexposed and one of them is blurred. Now, for best results with this, you're going to want to use your camera. Rather than taking a photo like I'm going to show you here in a minute and editing it fully from Photoshop Elements, I recommend that you get out there, which I just did. I went outside in the frigid cold, it's cold out there, and took some photos and played with my camera, and it really helped me to learn my camera a little bit more. But I took a photo with an aperture, I think I used 20 f-stop. I put it on the AV setting, and I changed the aperture to 20, and this gives a maximum depth of field and gives you that first image that needs to be sharp. And then I changed the exposure settings by 2 little clicks, 2 f-stops to the right. You'll recall you have that bar and you move it 2 to the right. And I took a photo. I used my tripod. I had a little trouble with the first one. I had to go out again because even with the tripod, the camera moved a little bit. And I'll show you that here in a little bit. The second photo, you want to widen your aperture to as wide as that lens will go. Often it's between 2.08 and 4, and I think mine varied depending. I don't know why, but I think mine was between 3.5 and sometimes 4. Just depends on your lens, so you want to move that slider all the way down as far as it goes. And then you want to defocus the lens for blobs of color. In other words, make it very blurry. So to do this, I took it off of automatic focus and used manual focus and moved the slider, moved on my lens. Each camera is different. I moved it till it got kind of blurry, and then I changed the overexposure to only 1 click to the right, and I took the exact same shot in the exact same spot, and then simply brought it into, and I'll go ahead and show you. Let's do that right now so you can see. The first time I went out, I had these 2 photos. I had this one is my blurry one that I took, and this one is my regular one I took, and both of them are overexposed. And I had trouble, it's winter here, and I had trouble finding any color of anything to take in my yard, and I found this bush. It was the only color out in the yard. And then all I simply did was to apply the blending mode. Here's this one without the blending mode. Then you apply the blending mode of multiply, and you get this Orton effect. Now, I didn't think that turned out very well at all. It was a little dark, plus my 2 photos didn't match. I had to line them up, reduce the opacity of one of them and try to line it up, and crop them to get them to be both the same because they had moved in my camera. But as one of these text things I'm going to show you says in a little bit, often the highlights are blown out, and you can see here the highlights are very blown out, and they're very blown out here, and so I actually duplicated these 2 layers, right click and merge down, and then I went to enhance, adjust lighting, and shadows and highlights. And then you can move these to whatever works best for your settings. You know, play around and then click OK, and you can see that looks a lot better than this, because I fixed the highlights. But let's go through, keep going through these. It says heavy shadows can become too dark with this technique, so consider using photos with more even lighting. So that is what happened to me up here in this photo. This photo, even though it's blown out, if I would have taken it normally, it has a lot of shadows because I'm taking it later in the afternoon and the sun is coming down and hitting lots of trees. We had trouble finding anything in our yard that didn't have lots of shadows all over it, and so that's exactly why you need to look for those with fewer shadows. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a photo like this. It's still dreamy, but the white highlights are taking over the photo. So the next thing I want to tell you is that this technique is often called, you'll see it on the internet, other than the Orton effect, ethereal. Now, I can't say this word. I had to put the spelling here. I often say urethrial, and I don't know why. Don't even tease me about it. But it's ethereal. And so ethereal photos are light and airy, and ethereal beauty is delicate and refined, and you can describe it as heavenly or dreamy, plain old dreamy. That's the word that we hear most about these photos. If you ever see one of the portraits, I'm not sharing with you here a photo done with a person, but if you ever see a portrait where the person is all dreamy looking, this is one of the techniques called the Orton effect, to get this ethereal feel to those images. This can also sometimes be called painterly, and I had to think about that. What does painterly mean? Painterly, you think of painting with a paintbrush, but what does that really mean? And so I had to look up some definitions, and this says having qualities peculiar to painting, duh, got that, especially the depiction of shapes by means of solid masses of color rather than by lines. And I don't like the way they spelt color here, but so in other words, if you think about it, you have a paintbrush rather than a pencil sketch. So you're taking a paintbrush, and when you watch a painter paint, they're doing little blobs here of color, little blobs here of color, and they look like a bunch of blobs of color, and then by the time they're done and you stand back, all those little blobs of color look like something. And I know I'm always amazed. I'm always amazed when I watch somebody paint and they take all these little blop, 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 blops and turn it, and suddenly it looks like something. That would be painterly. So it's more of a masses of color rather than lines. And the second definition I found says fine arts characterized by qualities of color, stroke, and texture perceived as distinctive to the art of painting, especially the rendering of forms and images in terms of color or tonal relations rather than contour and lines. So color and relations rather than contours and lines. That's painterly. So you can get this effect to look more painterly than ethereal just by changing the setting in the Gaussian blur. Now, you can go back to my fixing exposure tutorial here at Hummy's World and learn review about exposure. That is a good thing to do. In fact, I even did that before I started playing with all of this. You'll remember that an overexposed photo is getting too much light, and the histogram on the levels is pushed to the right. An underexposed photo is not getting enough light, and it is pushed to the left on the histogram. So I want you to understand how and why overexposure is so important rather than underexposure in this particular technique. When you take two overexposed photos, they're too light because you let in too much light, and you apply the multiplied blending mode, they become darker again. So when we go up to this photo we had here, and we're at normal, and we come down to apply the multiply blending mode, you observe that it's between this line, and every one of these blending modes makes things darker. And in the next set, every one of these will make things lighter. And so we are using two images and using the multiply, which makes it the two darker. So if you went the other way and made your images too underexposed and then applied the blending mode, well, then they'd be really too dark. And this has actually got too dark because it's got too many shadows in it. That is why this doesn't work well with every photo, as this example here shows. I'll explain some more here in a minute. I got one more text thing. It says highlights can get blown out with this effects and fix them by using the shadow and highlight feature, which is what I already shared with you up here when I did this and fixed it. And I fixed those blown out areas. Here's another sample. I had to go back out in my yard and try again. I have this image which I set as overexposure, and we tried everything we could to find some place with good lighting and not too many shadows, and it was very difficult. But we took our wheelbarrow and turned it over where it was light in the yard to take a picture of it, and my son actually drew this or scratched it. I'm not sure what he did. I thought it was chalk, but it can't be because it's been in there for years. We were a bit baffled by that. But this is my overexposed image that is sharp with, I think I had a aperture of 20. And then this is my blurred out image. And this time my camera tripod didn't move, and it stayed right together. But for this one, as I explained, I took the aperture all the way down to 4 and overexposed it by 1, and then I blurred it. I went on to manual focus and I blurred it. And when you put these two together and utilize the multiply mode, which I already have set, you get this dreamy effect. And you're going to see from this one, which is got more of the natural rusty color in here, I want you to observe the color, and then when I apply this one, look at how saturated the color is. This is what I was talking about when I said it was overly saturated. Now I found that this was too dark, and I could use the same thing that I did before with the adjusting the shadows and highlight, but I decided to try something different with this one, and I added a new adjustment layer for levels to this one, and I really liked what I got. I found that if you open up the adjustments, you're going to recall that if you go back to my fixing exposure tutorial, using the levels can fix your exposure or unfix it. So if wanting this to be more overexposed, I can slide this white one or the gray one to the right or to the left. Slide it to the left, and you can see how it gets more and more. Need to turn off my phone. More and more overexposed, and how it changes the image. So consider doing this when you're playing with your images. And I went ahead and changed it so it's a little bit more overexposed here. And then I did the same thing for the blurred out photo, and I added one to it, but the settings were a little bit different. You can see how they already were working. But then I just moved the slider until I felt I got something really dreamy. And I thought that that really worked. You can see it's oversaturated and it's kind of dreamy. But let's say you don't have time to go through all of these settings in your camera. And let's say you don't know your camera well, you don't feel like learning your camera well because you know you can do everything in Photoshop. Yes, you can. So that's where I have this one, and I'm going to show you. Here's my dreamy photo, and I took this a year ago. I was going to blog about it and forgot to, because I always see everywhere in magazines and blogs and stuff on the internet, why is it whenever they take photos of hot drinks, the people are wearing gloves? I don't know. So I took that picture, and you can see with this effect I made it very dreamy. And so let me share with you how to do this. It's really easy. Here is my original photo. It's not actually my original because I fixed it a little bit, but the original that we're going to be working with. And I'm going to duplicate this layer and keep that first one safe in case I want to do it again. And first we need to overexpose it. We've already discussed how you can use an adjustment layer and slide this to the left somehow, or even slide the gray one to get it overexposed. That's one way to overexpose it. But another way, which is really easy, is to just duplicate that layer, go up, apply the screen blending mode, and you see it perfectly overexposes it. Right click and choose merge down. Now we have a perfectly overexposed photo. Now we need an overexposed photo that is blurred. So I'm going to use this one. It's already overexposed. Control J to copy it. Filter, blur, Gaussian blur. You remember I said this is a filter challenge, and this is what we're utilizing. All this. How long have I been talking just to get to show you the filter? It's recommended maybe to do it anywhere between 5 and 50, but it's up to you. This is the point where you can make it more ethereal or more painterly. The lower settings down in here are going to make it more ethereal, maybe about right there. If you want to become more painterly, you just bump it up even more, where it got more blobs of color. I'm going to go down in here somewhere and click OK, and applied that Gaussian blur to it, and then all I do is put that blending mode on it, and we have a very ethereal photo. So I could do the same thing, Control J again, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and bump it way up there, and apply the multiply mode, and we get more of a painterly effect. There's no right or wrong setting. I mean, here's the first one, which is more dreamy, and this is obviously the more washed out, especially around here. And let's say I want to fix those highlights. I'm going to use this one. Hold down my control key to select them both and drag them to the new layer icon. So I've made a copy of them because I like to keep what I've got going along the way in backup. And right click and merge those two together, and then go to the Enhance drop down menu, Lighting, and Shadows and Highlight. And you can see that setting alone fixes it to make it a lot better than what it was. I'll show you again. This is what we had, and this is fixing the shadows and the highlights. Still dreamy. Depends on, both of them are good. Depends on what you like best. So that's it. That's as simple as it is. We could go back to this original one with this levels to blow it out, and then copy it and copy the levels, so we have a levels on each one. In fact, I can Control G them to the one that I want them to work with. Now I'm going to go up here, filter, blur, Gaussian blur to the one on top, blur it up a little bit more, and then apply the multiply blending mode to it. So there you go, I have it using the levels. And as always, what's good with using the adjustment layers is I can double click on this and change it to whatever I want to change it to, as well as this one. Make it real dreamy. Maybe I just want to do the gray slider. Anyway, there we have it. A dreamy cup of hot tea. I think I like my original dreamy best. Where was it? I don't remember now. I've lost it. Anyway, maybe it was up here. Here it is. There's my original dreamy. I like it best. There you have it. That is making an Orton effect, and I taught you a little bit about your camera, and I hope that you've learned a lot by this, even though it's a little bit long tutorial. It took me a long time to study up, and I'm glad I did. I kind of learned a lot. Let's see you use this on portraits or scenes or still life or whatever you want. And I look forward to seeing what you do to make something dreamy.